What's up, everyone? The streak continues, and we made it to Friday again. That means it's time for another episode of the TheLeaf podcast. Last week, I talked about a new Mayan city that had been discovered. I talked about these strange encounters that two soldiers had in the Arizona desert, and I also talked about the Alaskan Triangle and the theory that there could be an alien base that's kind of hidden in the mountains. Well, in this one, the high strangeness isn't going anywhere. I have some very strange encounters from Russia, back in the USSR days, and possibly from before. I don't really know, I'd have to look at them again. But this first thing that I have up on my screen here, and I'll put the link in the description of, it's from a website called The Conversation. And what this is, it's a new paper that hasn't been published yet, but it's probably going to be published. It talks about that what if the Big Bang wasn't the beginning? What if things were different than we thought they have been all along? Now, as I've said before, I am not a scientist, and I generally don't really know much about this, or really what I'm talking about in general. So, this is what I get from this. It seems to be saying that what if our universe actually came from the end of a previous one? It also gives the interesting idea that our universe could be inside of the black hole that came from this other universe when it collapsed. And now it's already hard enough regularly to comprehend billions of years, and let alone a universe that would have came before this one. But here we go. I'll read some quotes from this article, and then you can check out the whole thing down in the description. It starts off with, "The Big Bang is often described as the explosive birth of the universe, a singular moment when space, time, and matter sprang into existence. But what if this was not the beginning at all? What if our universe emerged from something else, something more familiar and radical at the same time?" So in general, I love space stuff anyways, so this is obviously super interesting to me. But it goes on to say that it's going to be published in Physical Review D. He says, "My colleagues and I propose a striking alternative. Our calculations suggest that the Big Bang was not the start of everything, but rather the outcome of a gravitational crunch or a collapse that formed a very massive black hole, followed by a bounce inside of it. And it's an idea that they call the black hole universe." Which right from the get-go, that's a really cool name, so kudos to them for calling it the black hole universe theory. And I could be very wrong, which is why I'm going to leave the article so that somebody who's a lot smarter can go through it and probably pick out something that I misunderstood or something. But what it seems to be saying is that generally what happens is after the collapse of a universe, it contracts again, and then eventually it will form another Big Bang. In this case, they're saying that it may cause a supermassive black hole, and within that black hole, the matter could be condensed again, and it could kind of bounce inside of the black hole, creating a whole nother universe from a black hole of another one. I don't know. Let me know what you think of the idea down below. I think it's really cool. I think it also can leave open the idea that if this has happened quite a few times, are we the only universe within this supermassive black hole that's the remnants of the old one? And then you wonder if every black hole that's in our universe is kind of like a portal to another one. It really kind of seems to go on forever, doesn't it? But yeah, let me know what you think about it. And if you want to, you can read the article below. And now, we'll get into some really strange, I guess is the best word. I know I use that word a lot on the channel, but these are really strange encounters with aliens. And of course, I will also link this down below as well. This is by an author named Brent Swancer, and I generally really like his articles whenever I come across them, and this is no exception. So, our first encounter here is from 1932, definitely just the other day, right? But in 1932, a 12-year-old Vera Alexandrova T was walking out in the rural area near her home in Yaroslavl province when she saw this flying ship. It came sweeping down over the river and made a wave strong enough to overturn all the boats. And then, as if this wasn't already odd enough, it then landed into a potato field and then started digging a hole into the ground, and it kind of just sunk into this hole, or submerged itself almost completely into the ground. And it gets stranger still. Not long after this, a group of new people were sighted around the village, and you can guess how it would be back in 1932 in a rural village. If anybody new comes in, everybody's going to know about it. And with these visitors, this was no exception, especially since they had greenish-brown tinted skin, sallow complexions, only had 4 fingers on each hand, and they had hooves for feet. They seemed to have a clear leader who was taller than the rest of them, and the other ones had a bit of a dour expression, but his was quite friendly. He even talked and laughed with the locals, even though he did so not by speaking directly to them, but through telepathy. After some time, the locals began to call them medics, because they were seen walking around with instruments that probably looked like something out of a hospital. They had shiny tanks with tubes coming out of them, and at night they would go into people's houses. They would insert the tubes into the bodies of the sleeping people, and would apparently measure stuff, take readings, and all that. They apparently performed experiments on livestock as well. And they also, this is something that's kind of interesting to me because I mentioned it before, they seemed to have these pets that resembled black monkeys. They were known to be quite mischievous. They would steal objects and take chickens and stuff. At some point, these little pet monkeys began stealing crops, which I can see how that would anger anybody in the village. And then on one occasion, they were seen sucking grain from a silo with a strange machine. And it gets, yet again, even stranger. These crops and grains were loaded into an elephant-like beast, and then brought to the partially buried ship. Then they were put there, or unloaded there. Several weeks later, they just up and left. The ship was gone. The monkeys were gone. All of it was gone. They just left no answers about what happened here. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in that encounter. Now, the first thing that I thought of when they described what these aliens looked like is that it kind of reminds me of some, folktales I've heard about fae, about beings with hooved feet, which kind of just remind me of fae and folk creatures, but maybe that's where they're from. It's really hard to say. And then the other thing was about these monkey pets. I mentioned before that I heard a theory a long time ago, I don't even remember where I heard it, that Bigfoot, in some cases, was a pet of certain alien races, and this kind of just made me think of that. Of course, this is different, and the monkeys were assumedly pretty small, and that's even if they actually were monkeys, because, it's 1932, it's in rural Russia, and that just might be the best way they have to describe what they're seeing. Not saying they weren't, I'm just going over different possibilities, but it's definitely very odd. I can't imagine living in a community like that and then having these random aliens show up, do all this stuff, and then just leave. Especially the part about them doing experiments on livestock and seemingly to put things into people and just to take readings or whatever they were trying to do. But let me know what you would do in this situation. Would you be the type to try and rise up with the villagers and get them out of there? Would you just hope they go away? Or would you be the type to just hope they didn't come into your house? And the reason why I picked this one and the next one is a reason that you'll definitely see. It's about the experiments, and after I get to the part in this next encounter, I'm going to ask you what you think about it. Do you think that they're telling the truth? So this takes place in the summer of 1948. A young boy and two girls in the Stavropol region of northern Caucasus, Russia, were out near their rural village. They were just watching cows graze, eating their lunch. The boy in the group decided that he wanted to go to the other side of the hill and take a nap. After some time, he was awoken by a piercing whistle. He bolted up. He saw a silver-colored object resembling a huge upside-down plate. It landed not far away from him on 3 prongs. As he stared at this strange craft, the object opened up, and 3 tall and thin humanoid entities dressed in tight-fitting suits came over to him. It was then that he realized he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. He was powerless to resist as they took his hand and led him toward the craft. Once taken inside the craft, the boy could see that they were in a long corridor. It was lined with 4 cages made out of metallic rods. Each of them held a bear, a woman, 3 men, and 1 cage, a single man, apparently of Slavic descent. As they took him by these cages, the occupants that were in them didn't react very well. The bear growled and snarled and paced about angrily. The woman screamed in hysterics. Apparently her hair was disheveled and there was foam coming out of her mouth. 3 men dropped to their knees and began to pray. The boy was then shoved into the cage with the Slavic man, who seemed to be the calmest of the bunch, and he tried to calm down the boy who this was all happening to. The aliens then left. Everybody calmed down after that. After this, they could tell that the craft had taken off, and apparently it wasn't long after that they came back. They seemed to pull an operating table just straight out of the wall, and then they grabbed one of the 3 men that was in the other cage and led him toward it. Although the man's face was pure terror, he seemed to not be able to fight what was going on, almost like he was paralyzed, just like the boy was when they took him aboard. The Slavic man who was in the cell with the boy seemed to try to pull the boy's attention away from what was going to happen, as if he had seen it already. But what they did see was that they took these bizarre instruments, they laid the man on the table, and began cutting him open and dismembering him. He was obviously unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything, even as the blood sprayed about. They removed his body parts and put them in these metallic boxes. When they were finished, they just cleaned up the blood, carried away the boxes, and just what remained on the table of the man, and just took it away. At this point, as you can imagine, the boy was overcome by absolute fear. The man in the cage, though, tried to calm him down. He told the boy he was a mining engineer from the Urals, and that his name was Alexander. He told the boy that he had a plan to get them out of there, and urged him to try to squeeze through the bars of the cage. After this, he managed to do so. He took a lot of effort, but he did get it done. After he got through, there was some sort of button that Alexander wanted him to push, but he couldn't quite reach it, because again, he's just a boy. Alexander began removing articles of clothing, and then stacking them on the floor, piling them, to try to get the boy to stand on it until he was able to push it. And as soon as he pushed the button, all the cages opened. But then something else weird happened here. There was this eerie silence. The woman didn't move. The bear didn't move. They all seemed to be in some kind of trance, some kind of daze. But since Alexander and the boy were now free, they headed down the corridor and tried to find some way to get out of this craft. They went through several rooms of this craft. They found 2 sleeping aliens and another control room with another alien asleep with the controls. Alexander began looking around frantically, trying to find some kind of thing, a weapon to defend themselves, but they couldn't find anything. Then, as they were stumbling around this ship, they found what seemed to be an engine room. There was a metallic box with a stripe on it that was set up on metallic struts. Alexander picked up this box and proceeded to throw it onto some kind of control panels in the room. And in just like a sci-fi movie, it smoked and sparked, as well as an alarm went off. Two of these aliens rushed into the room and scuffled with Alexander, as another one appeared with a metallic rod that somehow was instantly able to paralyze him. Then, they dragged both of them back to their cage. They seemed to be back to square one. Then, the aliens communicated telepathically with Alexander and asked why he was so capable when the others were such a, quote, low level of development. Alexander replied that they were likely just uneducated and scared out of their minds. Then, these aliens explained that they were there on Earth because they were concerned about mankind's use of atomic energy, so they wanted to monitor the Earth civilization. They also explained that radioactive materials were quite useful on their world, but they don't have a large supply of them. They use them for fuel. The boy then says, quote, they told Alexander that to waste radioactive material for explosions was madness. These materials could be used for other needs, and they, the aliens, had these materials in very low quantity, and were very valuable to them. They used the radioactive materials to obtain energy, which they used in various branches of science and technique, and also for space travel. They told him that they wanted to study our planet and also gather these radioactive substances, and that they didn't know much about humankind. When asked why they had so brutally dismembered and cut apart that man, they said that they dissected him for study, and they didn't realize that he was a sentient being, and until meeting Alexander, didn't realize that humans were intelligent. To them, the men that they had were no different from the bear. They were just an animal, but now they knew differently. Then they asked him if he wanted to go with them, and he agreed, only on the condition that they released all the prisoners. They agreed. The boy was dropped off where he had first been abducted. This wasn't before giving him some kind of injection, saying that it was used to counteract the radiation that he had been exposed to on their ship. Later on, the boy woke up back on the same hill. He was very thirsty. He had a strong headache. He noticed that there was a search party out looking for him, but he couldn't really remember what had happened. Everything was foggy. He said that he was sick for several days with a fever and had a metallic taste in his mouth. His skin and eyes were extremely sensitive to sunlight. Years went by, and then one day he was approached by two military men, a man in a civilian clothing, while the other seemed very familiar to him, but whom he didn't know. They basically asked him about the UFO encounter. He said he didn't remember. He said the man must be mistaken. The other guy, who was in civilian clothing, said that they wanted to interrogate him under hypnosis, but the other guy in military clothing said to just leave it be, because the others didn't trust him. They told the boy to forget about their visit with them, not only the UFO, but the military's visit as well. And then, years later, he did undergo hypnosis, and all of these memories were dredged up. So then I ask you first, what do you think? Do you think they were telling the truth when they said they didn't realize that humankind was intelligent? Do you think that that's why that they consistently just dismember people the same as they dismember cattle? Or do you think they're just lying? Because I think that if they have the technology to detect that humankind can do some kind of atomic energy explosions, atomic weapons, then they must know that we are intelligent. Or, unless they consider themselves to be so evolved and so much higher, that to them it was the bear who was the one who had split the atom and made all these explosions and caused all these wars. But no, I don't really believe that. I think that it was just them realizing they've been caught and trying to defuse the situation by playing it off as a misunderstanding. But you could totally disagree with me. That's up to you. Do you think that they were telling the truth? Do you think that they just simply did not know? And that when they said that they only detected us using atomic weapons and nothing else, that's what happened? And the reason why that I asked you if you thought they were telling the truth is in the first encounter, do you think that they didn't realize that we're sentient beings, we have free will, and we are intelligent? Well, I mean, some of us are anyways. I just sit in a dark room and talk about my little schizo theories. But, yeah, let me know what you thought about it. Do you think that they didn't know? Do you think that once they discovered it that they just took off? Or do you think that they're kind of curious about us, maybe scared of us? It's really hard to say. Yeah, I'll leave you to tell me your theories down in the comments. Maybe you totally disagree with me, and that's great. I want to hear about it. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leaf Podcast. I'm sitting here with my cat, and I think that by her purring, I think she enjoyed it. So hopefully you did too. And if you want to send in a story to the channel, there's an email in the description. There's a PayPal and a Patreon link in there as well. Here on YouTube, there is, I forgot the names of them for a second, super thanks and memberships. And yeah, I hope to see you Sunday. Thank you for getting this far in the video. And yeah, I'll see you Sunday. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.